Hey guys, you asked and I am going to try and answer. So the other day I sent out a message asking for people to ask me lots of questions, and I was going to pick the 10 most popular ones. So I've done that. And so today I'm going to answer some of your questions. Also, thank you so much for taking the time to ask the questions, because it means that other people get to hear the answers as well. The first question is from Cabby Funk. They're basically asking about strings. What strings are good for beginner, intermediate and advanced? So this is my opinion, and this is on my own research. I know there are lots of great brands out there, and it's worth you trying different brands, seeing what works best for you. A great budget brand is the Presto Tonica strings. Now, I'm mostly going to talk about violin, because the question was about violins. So Tonica strings are my bet for a beginner string that's not too expensive. It's made of synthetic material, they sound good, and they make an instrument sound good. More intermediate are some good strings that I like. The Violino strings. Also, dominant strings are quite good, even though they've been getting a bit more expensive more recently. And maybe strings like Helicore, or that they're fairly decent strings. I mostly use Violino strings in the more immediate, but I do buy a lot of I do use a lot of Presto strings. I don't know, I mean, they've been around since the 1700s. They kind of know their stuff, so I do like working with them. But there's other companies that make great strings as well, like, there's Larsen, there's Dario, and, lots of other companies as well that are making strings. Okay, and for good strings, I personally like Eva Perazzi Gold for some instruments. If you want a more mellow sound, the Obbligato strings are great. Also, the Peter Infield strings are very good for an advanced instrument. That's what I'd recommend. Also, when it comes to strings, I like to stick to one brand mostly, have all 4 strings of one brand. For violin, you can play around with the E. Quite often, if you want to, the E is probably the one that's often most different. Now for cello, that is quite often very different. Quite often players will use 3 different string types for cellos. Natalie asked, we hear lots about violins but little about bows. What do we have to look for when choosing a bow? Now, I made a whole video about bows. Just check the link up the top. But the basic thing, you want a bow to make your playing easier. So you want a bow to work well for you. You want it to feel good in the hand. Now, there are a few things that are important about a bow. You want to make sure that the bow is straight when you look down it. You pretty much look down a bow like this, and you'll be able to see if it's straight. You also want to make sure it's got a good amount of spring. You want to make sure that it's got the right kind of weight feel for you. And then you want to make sure that the balance is in the right place. So you can find out the balance, like where the bow is balanced, by pushing your fingers together like this. And then there's a balance point, so it'll be approximately here on this bow. It's different on different bows. Just see what works for you. Try different things. Try different types of staccato, big, long, rich bows to just make sure that the bow works all around for you. People like Maxim Van Gogh, for him it's almost been a life work finding that right bow, and he's tried lots of different bows. And when I talked to him a few years ago, he he said he still felt that he still could do better finding a bow. So it can be quite a long search, but don't get too hung up on it. In the end, you're playing's the most important thing, so don't let that hold you up. Thanks for asking the next question, Harry. Now, you asked, why do traditional folk fiddlers have a bridge of the instrument less arched than a classical violinist? Is it meant to improve double stops and crossing strings? As a traditional Irish fiddle player, I have always wondered this. So the normal bridge arching is about this. I have a template that I use for the bridge arching, and it allows the player to get from across the strings easily enough without touching other strings, even when they're playing very hard. Now, when it comes to folk fiddling, quite often you are looking for double stops. So you're trying to play 2 or sometimes even 3 strings at once. So that can be done by flattening the bridge a little bit. Do you remember the Flat Bridge Society? Now that's what would happen when the bridge is totally flat. Imagine the melodies you could do around that, even if you did, if you changed the tuning. So that could be so much fun. Just be careful not to destroy your violin with tuning. Like if you tune too high or too low, make sure you keep your bridge straight and things like that. So there you go. So the main reason is getting around for double stops. You're absolutely right. So Aaron asked, I think I want to become a luthier and open a music shop. Violinists are particular about their luthiers. How hard is it for you to find a following? Did you have to move to a certain area near a customer base? Any advice for people starting from scratch? So I've just got 5 pieces of advice. First of all, get very good at being a violin maker. So really get skilled up. Second one is really learn, really understand players, like be good to players. Players want to be understood and they want their violin maker to really help them. Third, be good to your clients. Of course you've got to be good to your clients. Be nice to your clients. Be kind. People don't want to be treated like crap. People, no matter how good you are or how good you think you are, it's important that you treat your clients with respect, and they deserve a lot of respect. Love what you do. Just enjoy what you do. And if you're worried about opening up somewhere, just learn about marketing. Akram A asked, how can you effectively choose a good rosin for your bow? I feel like there are plenty and they seem all similar. Now there's very big differences in rosins. You can get some very light rosins, some dark rosins, some softer rosins and some harder rosins. So I always recommend to use a good reputable rosin and play around. I personally like a few different rosins. I like the Melos rosin. I also like the Bernadelle rosin, and I like the Eco rosin by Leatherwood. They're a nice rosin. Also, for a budget rosin, the Heidesign or Heidesign Junior are great. Now, I'm going to answer a little bonus question here. I play cello and want to ask, what's the difference between dark and light rosin? The dark rosin has a bit more oomph. That's a technical term. And technical term for just a bit more bite. Brad asked, it's interesting to see alternatives to the traditional violin making materials that, while renewable in a sense, are becoming scarce because of over-harvesting and demand. I wonder what your thoughts are on the longevity and serviceability of instruments made of carbon fiber or other materials. How stable are the resins and adhesives used in the construction of these instruments, and is it even possible or feasible to repair a damaged violin constructed from carbon fiber or other materials? Now, firstly, a carbon fiber instrument to me sounds quite different to most other instruments. To me, there's something missing in the brilliance of the instrument, like the timbre. So a big part of the instrument is the spruce on the top plate, and the spruce has very let me see, you can kind of see, you can see the lines, the dark and the light lines on the spruce, and so the dark lines are the winter grain, and the light lines are the summer grain. And so the dark grains actually are very, very hard and quite strong, and the light grains are fairly soft. So that means that up and down the instrument, like this way, there's not so much movement this way. But when you go sideways, there's a lot more movement sideways because of the soft grain. So that creates a very distinctive type of sound. And that could be difficult to emulate with carbon fiber. So carbon fiber is a very different material, and the repairs would be very different. Like they'd be similar to surfboard repairs and things like that. But then the setup would obviously be very much like a normal violin setup. Like the bridge and strings and pegs and things like that. So as far as how long those glues or those adhesives hold, the jury's out on that. Like how long does a fiberglass boat hold? You know, I think, you know, there's some fiberglass boats that are 30, 40, maybe 50 years old, but I have noticed that they start getting a bit brittle. Is the same going to happen to stringed instruments? We don't know because they haven't been around for 30 or 40 years. So we're going to find out. Same with the bows, with carbon fiber bows. We just don't know yet because they haven't been around for long enough. So John asked, is there an absolute definition of the dimension of a violin? Like the circumference of the neck in the first position and things like that. So there are some parts of the instrument that have standard measurements, and then there are other parts that are open to interpretation. So the body of the instrument, like the body shape, can vary quite a bit. So the size of the C bouts, the width of the C bouts, the width of the lower and upper bouts, and the placement of the F-holes can all be quite variable. You know, the F-holes can be higher, lower, a bit closer together, further apart, and things like that. So there's a lot of variables there. But when it comes to some measurements, there are standards. For example, the string height above the fingerboard, the neck thickness, the height of the nut above the fingerboard, the string spacing, and those kinds of things. There's some very exact measurements. So yes, there are some exact measurements, and some measurements are more fluid and depend on the maker. The shape of the body will really have a big effect on the tone, so that's good to know. If you want to know the standard measurements, there's a booklet that Henry Strobel put out, and it is fantastic. Very simple, not too expensive, and it has all the right measurements. You know, there are other books that are really expensive, but this one isn't. So it's a good book to get. Cat Lawless asked, what's the most important thing you want future luthiers to know? Remember, the players are the most important part of the instrument, and you need to learn to work with them. Also, they keep you in business. Get really good at using Violinmaker's tools. 3, have really, really sharp tools it makes it so much easier and it's actually safer. 4, have fun. We are lucky to be working in a really beautiful profession. So Nathan asked, as a luthier of only 4 years of experience, I mainly work with student and rental instruments for school departments. With that said, kids beat them to a pulp. My question is, how do I safely separate the front and back of the instrument and then re-glue the bouts evenly without hurting it? Thanks, Olaf. Love the content. Thanks, Nathan. Appreciate that. Now, I use my splitting knife, and you would have seen me do the video with Two-Set where where I split open a violin.
Oh God, you're kidding me.
And so that's the most effective way, but some cheaper instruments are really hard to separate. So you have to do it very, very slowly and carefully. I also sometimes use a little bit of methylated spirits, a tiny, tiny bit. So once the knife is in, I use the tiniest bit of methylated spirits. Don't try this at home. And it will soften the glue a little bit. If non-traditional glues have been used, you're in trouble. It's not fun. You might try with heat or something like that, but quite often the cheapest instruments are the hardest to take apart, which is sad. Like the t-shirt change? So, Catherine asked, how can we find and then evaluate a local luthier? So, obviously, you just use the usual suspects to find your local luthier. You know, Google and the likes. But then, look at the reviews. It's the first thing. Secondly, like, check word of mouth. You know, maybe ask at your local conservatorium or with your local orchestra, who do they use? Then once you meet your maker, make sure that you get along well with them and that they really understand you and your needs. And finally, check that they've received good training. Sometimes, you know, self-trained makers have opened up shops and they sound the part, everything's right, and then, you know, turns out they're just self-trained. I recently received an instrument from a client, actually just a couple of days ago, and she said, "Oh yes, no, I've had my luthier work on it," and I looked at the instrument, and actually, I've got it here. 1 second. Here it is now. So take a look at this. So this person said he's a trained luthier, and so the client thought he was trained. So he glued these cracks. Like there's one, there's another one, there, and then there's some more. Just one. Those two. Those aren't even glued. Like they're still open. You can see I'm pressing down, and it's actually moving. So none of the cracks are glued. Look at the string height. Like the string height of like the fingerboard has fully sunk. When he re-glued the top plate, the fingerboard was right down. The bridge has the wrong curvature and is really, really badly cut. Like it's so amateurish. So yes, some people can say they're violin makers when they're not. And so you do have to watch out for that and make sure you find a maker that has the correct training, that's good at their work, and that you can work with well. Eric asked, what is some of the best advice you've ever received as a luthier? Finish one step before starting the next one. So when you're doing a repair, there's always, you know, one step after the next step after the next step, and using different tools for each step. So finish one step fully and then move on to the next step. Don't stop short ever. Don't, you know, even if you're lazy, you have to be patient. If you do that, you end up doing some really good quality work. Obviously you need to be skilled with the tools, but that's one of my best pieces of advice that I got as a violin maker. There was also a very specific question about a specific violin violin, and when you find an old instrument, now this one was supposed to have fallen, like this one had been in the ocean for some time. Like if a violin is in the ocean for a while, like it would literally disintegrate into its separate components, especially if it was in the ocean for 2 days. So that's a very difficult repair. I'll show you enough of that, sorry. It's too hard to hold that there. I'll show you a cello that's been in the floods. Take a look at this. That's the back, the top plate, and this is what's left of the ribs. I've got the other part. I have the rest of the ribs as well, but when an instrument falls into the water or is immersed in water, it just doesn't last long at all. I've had a client who had an instrument in a flood for just, I think it was in the flood for maybe 6 hours. And this was a violin, and it totally fell apart. I was able to glue it back together, and funnily enough, when it was finished, it sounded better than it did before. But yes, so it can be, something like that can be repaired. Now, if you have a query about a specific instrument and you think you've got a valuable Italian instrument, get in contact with the auction houses or the people that have sold them and that see lots of, and that write the certificates. Because I mean, if you did find $1 million instrument, you know, like actually spending a bit of money to get it properly evaluated isn't a big problem. But do watch my video where I say I've found a real Stradivarius, because that's quite enlightening. There are a lot of copies. Great. Anyway, so I hope I answered all your questions. I hope you enjoyed the video. Keep asking questions. Keep, keep giving me feedback of what you'd like to see in a video. There were a few good suggestions, and I'll try and take them on board. It's also, you've got to remember, it is mostly me. So, and I also run a shop and I do my repairs and things like that. So, sometimes I struggle a little bit to get the videos up. I try and give you regular, really valuable content, and so sometimes I'll take a bit longer to actually publish a video. Anyway, hope you liked this video. Hope it helped you lots, gave you some ideas. Remember to like and subscribe, hit the little bell, keep making beautiful music, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!